Hi, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Beetcoin dialogue. Some of you have been on previous ones, and some of you, this might be the first one. Tonight's session is has a different focus than our previous meetings. Because of the war in Ukraine, and mostly because I haven't been sleeping that well. I thought it might be a good opportunity for us to get together and have a little bit more of a reflective, have some time to reflect together. It's too bad we can't all be together, obviously, but we'll just take advantage of Zoom to be together in a different way. And the previous sessions have mostly have been on kind of let's say have been about the what and the how, or the what and the who, maybe I should say better. In other words, who we're funding and what kind of farming enterprises we're funding. And just in case people don't know, all of the previous events are available on the Beetcoin website under the Dialogues tab, just in case you don't know that that's there. And we had one of these sessions about a month ago, was put on by one of our dear friends and colleagues named Marco Evangelisti, and that was about do no harm investing. And he's someone who's involved with slow money, who's come from a career in finance, and was giving a very beautiful overview of kind of an alternative way to think about investing and how to get destructive activities out of your investment portfolio. And he actually uses the phrase do no harm investing. So tonight we're coming together to think about doing no harm under the shadow of the outbreak of hostilities. And just it certainly brought up a lot for me. And I'm working on a piece called A Call to Farms that has the exact same name as tonight's Beetcoin dialogue, A Call to Farms, Some Thoughts on Food, Money, and Nonviolence in Honor of Wendell Berry. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to share that with you. It's a written document. It'll be about maybe a dozen pages long, and depending on how we format it, what we try to do, we could have it up on our website as soon as next week, but just, it won't be too long. And I might read I think I'll read a paragraph or two from that later in the program. What we're going to do tonight is the following. I'm going to read a few pages from my book, the pages that deal with Wendell Berry, and excerpts from his essay. I always screw up the title of this essay. Some Thoughts on Citizenship and Conscience in Honor of Donald Pratt. And you'll hear in that name the echo of the title of tonight's program. And I'm going to read that. So it includes some chunks of that essay, and then some of my thoughts about it woven together. And then we are very lucky to have with us tonight Wendell Berry's daughter, Mary, who many of you can see on the screen right now. I'm very honored to call Mary a friend. We share a birthday, which is kind of a funny little quinkadink.
Well, you're a little older than I am. Let's make that.
Yeah, it's not the same day of the year. Yes, we can make that clear, just so there's no confusion. And after I do the reading, I'll just kind of give Mary a chance to share whatever. She doesn't have a formal presentation. She's just here to kind of be part of the conversation with us in any way she feels moved to do. And obviously, when we go to the Q&A and conversation, you'll be able to ask her or me or anybody else anything you want. For those of you who haven't done one of these before, after when we get to the open conversation, because it's Zoom, depending on how big the meeting gets, we're up to 73 people right now. That's still, I would say, somewhat manageable based on the previous experience. People can just unmute themselves, keep yourself muted until then. And then if you want to say something, just unmute yourself and jump in. Try to remember to introduce yourself and say where you live, just so people get a sense. Everyone always forgets to do that. It's always nice to know where people are from. If it gets too unruly, we'll ask people to raise their hands and I'll call on people. If people are jumping all over each other, we'll see how that goes. And then at the very end of the program, because this is a different kind of a session, we'll probably reserve 5 minutes to sit in silence, if that feels like the right thing to do when we get there. If it doesn't, we don't have to do it. But as someone who went to Quaker meeting for 10 years and has experience of what it can be like to sit in silence with a group of fellow souls, This might be a good time for us to give it a try. I've done it in many other meetings, but usually when we're in the room together. So I don't know how that's going to be, how that will be on Zoom. So we'll play that by ear, but we're scheduled to go for an hour. We'll try to stick to that, although usually we do tend to go over a little bit, but we'll just kind of see where everybody's energy is when we get to the hour. I think that's everything in terms of the setup. I guess I wanted to say one other thing before I did the reading, and that was just to do this because this is one of the pithiest one sentences ever. And no, Mary, it didn't come from your dad. It came from Gary Snyder. So he probably would approve. And it's food is the field in which we daily explore our harming of the world. So the poet Gary Snyder wrote that in one of his essays. And it always struck me as just a really deep, pithy way to talk about the, to frame the issues of food, agriculture, and violence and harm. So that's the theme of tonight. I'm just going to jump into my little reading here. And I guess the only last thing I just want to give us permission to have tonight be whatever it needs to be. If there's lots of silence, that's fine. If people have lots on their mind and they really want to share, I just say if you really do start going off on something, just try to be respectful of everybody else's time. There's a lot of people on the call, and a lot of people, might have things they want to say too. So we'll just we'll kind of feel our way tonight. So thank you all for coming. All right, so this is from part 5 of the book Aha, which is on our website. And I'm just going to read these 4 pages. So excuse me for looking away. I am contemplating these 2 phrases: healing pulses of capital and peaceable mobilizations of people. Reconnecting to one another, to the places where we live, and to the land. Taken together, these 2 phrases stop me in my tracks. No thought experiment about a thing called nurture capital can reasonably be undertaken without evoking Wendell Berry, who has forgotten more than I shall ever know about much that is in this notebook. That cannot be helped. Just as war is too important to leave to the generals, and finance is too important to leave to the financiers, culture, which includes economics, it should not be the other way around, is too important to not evoke Wendell Berry. The nurture in nurture capital comes from him. I mean, not quite literally. I got the phrase from a moving passage in The Unsettling of America. I find myself thinking today about an essay that Berry wrote in 1968 about a University of Kentucky student being arrested for protesting the war in Vietnam. It was a week after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, there's a danger in my attempting to lift excerpts from this essay, as it is in its entirety one of the most formative pieces of writing for me in Berry's remarkable canon of 50 or so books of essays, fiction, and poetry. Some Thoughts on Citizenship and Conscience in Honor of Donald Pratt is a worthy sequel to Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. But unlike Thoreau's essay, which roughly a century earlier made reference to the Mexican-American War against which Thoreau had protested, Some Thoughts on Citizenship and Conscience in Honor of Donald Pratt contains no mention of the war in Vietnam. Berry looked past the precipitating event to what he saw as the underlying cultural wounds, a disconnection from the land so profound that it undercuts civic engagement and leads to violence. Quote, I am struggling amid all the current political uproar to keep clearly in mind that it is not merely because our policies are wrong that we are so destructive and violent. It goes deeper than that and is more troubling. We are so little at peace with ourselves and our neighbors because we are not at peace with our place in the world, our land. Too many are now expending themselves utterly in the service of political abstractions, and my guess is that this is because of a growing sense of guilt and a growing belief that this guilt can be expiated in political action. How can a man hope to promote peace in the world if he has not made it possible in his own life and his own household? Unquote. What must have struck many as an idealistic preference to talk about the virtues of small farms and sense of place amidst anti-war protest and widespread civil unrest was and is for Berry a matter of essential grounding and pragmatism. Quote, I wish to speak no further except out of the few acres of hillside and woods and riverbank near Port Royal, Kentucky, that I hope to have made mine for life. I accept the meanings of that place. For the time I will be there as my meanings, accepting also that my life and its effects belong ineradicably to that place. I am occupied there with a small orchard, vines and berry bushes, henyard and garden and pasture, with increasing the richness and the abundance and the meaningfulness of that part of the earth for my family and myself and for those who will live there after us. This effort has given me many hours of intense pleasure, both in itself and in the sense of what it means as a human possibility. It holds out to me in the most immediate way the hope of peace, the ideal of harmlessness, the redeeming chance that a man can live so as to enhance and enlarge the possibility of life in the world, rather than to diminish it. Unquote. I'm going to linger along these banks of the Kentucky River a bit longer, because clearly this thought experiment has a life of its own and I want to respect and learn from it. Over the years, I've revisited this terrain many, many times, but that doesn't mean there still isn't a lot to learn. We are all too eager to move on. We keep pressing forward, doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result, as if covering new terrain will make up for our inability to have settled properly that from which we've come. Quote, the American disease is the assumption that when a man has exploited and used up the possibilities of one place, he has only to move on to another place. This has made us a nation of transients, both physically and morally. It seems to me that our people are suffering terribly from a sort of spiritual nomadism, a loss of meaningful contact with the earth and the earth's cycles of birth, growth, and death. Unquote. We are a displaced people. This is a hard thing to say from a perch of privilege, while 80+ million refugees are suffering much more immediate and severe forms of displacement around the world. Yet Americans' failure to recognize and reckon with the legacy of displacement that is at the heart of our national experiment casts a long shadow here and abroad. And unless we are able to dispel it, the shadow will continue contributing to suffering on a global scale. Wendell Berry's heightened sense of place is a response to this shadow. Quote, my devotion thins as it widens. I care more for my household than for the town of Port Royal, more for the town of Port Royal than for the county of Henry, more for the county of Henry than for the state of Kentucky, more for the state of Kentucky than for the United States of America. But I do not care more for the United States of America than for the world. I must attempt to care as much for the world as for my household. Those are the poles between which a competent morality would balance and mediate the doorstep and the planet. The most meaningful dependence of my house is not on the US government, but on the world, the earth. No matter how sophisticated and complex and powerful our institutions, we are still exactly as dependent on the earth as earthworms. To cease to know this and to fail to act upon the knowledge is to begin to die the death of a broken machine. In default of man's personal cherishing and care, now that his machinery has become so awesomely powerful, the earth must become the victim of his institutions, the violent self-destructive machinery of man in the abstract. And so, conversely, the most meaningful dependence of the earth is not on the US government, but on my household. How I live, how I raise my children, how I care for the land entrusted to me. Unquote. I know my reading didn't do it justice, but I did my best. And Mary, I think I'll just turn it over to you to just share a few top of mind thoughts, knowing that the Berry Center, I'm not sure if everybody on here knows that Mary is the executive director of the Berry Center. And you know, in the kind of foreground, the mission is to preserve and restore, you know, the livelihoods of small farmers and agrarian culture. But kind of, you know, behind it, around it is a very strong vision of kind of the violence of the modern economy and the destructiveness of the economy, and how, you know, why our inability to value and protect small farms is kind of evidence of an economy that's really gone awry. So Mary, rather than me bloviating at all, why don't I just turn it over to you to share whatever's on your mind. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm glad to see all of you. I wish that I was actually seeing all of you in some kind of real time. But as Woody said, I started the Berry Center 11 years ago to continue my family's advocacy for small farmers and for their communities. I went to my father probably around 2009 and said, you know, in spite of 40 years of a food movement, and in spite of the good work of many people, and many people, Joan Gosal, I see right there, many good people, the local food movement has not changed the culture of agriculture. Farmers can't afford to farm well if they can afford to farm at all. So I went to work. I think that the most important thing that I have learned from my family is that the state that we're in now has not been inevitable. And when I say the state we're in, I am right now talking about rural Kentucky. I'm sitting about 12 miles from my parents' house, where I grew up. The state of rural America is dire. There's not a town in Henry County that's not dead or dying. But what I learned from my family is that what's happened to our rural places, and that would be rural places all over the world, has not been inevitable. It's been destruction by design. My father asked in one of the prefaces of The Unsettling of America, it's been reissued many times with new prefaces, all saying, I wish this book wasn't still necessary, but evidently it is. My father said, are we or are we not going to take care of our land and our people? And the question has been answered in the negative for a long time now. But if we've been destroyed by design, then the design can be different. And we are devoted, as all of you all are, to changing that design. Rural America, farmland has been treated like the coal fields in Appalachia. Our raw materials have been stolen for a long time at the cheapest price possible, or just flat out stolen. So we are at war with the world. The way we live the way we live now has put us at war with the world. And as Thomas Merton said, we're all implicit in the general sham. But on the other hand, I think it's our duty to be hopeful, and I am hopeful. I enjoy my work every day. I also learned that from my family. I'm glad and lucky to be doing this work. And I'm going to read a little something of Daddy's, but I want to say maybe the thing that I would really like to I'd like to have more people pay attention to is the fact that when we talk about our country, the United States of America, we're not talking about, or we shouldn't be talking about the economy or our institutions or the military. We need to talk about the land that is our country, our commonwealth. And so as long as we are not thinking about the land and the people, the land of this country, as long as we're not thinking about the land and the people together, always together, never separated, then we're going to reconcile ourselves to war. And that's a terrible place to be. So in the 3 minutes, Woody, after we talked a bit and then this conversation started, I thought of something that my father wrote, an essay called Peaceableness Toward Enemies. It was published in 1991. So it's in response to the Gulf War. And I want to read just a little bit of the end of it, because I think it encompasses my work, Woody's work, all of our work. And I write some myself. I give talks all over the country and so on. But whenever I read my father's work, I think, why do I bother? Why don't I just pick this up and read it? So I'm going to start. I'm just going to start from peaceableness toward enemies. We must recognize first that we have made such progress in the technology of war that we have destroyed the capacity of war to improve anything. The Gulf War typically destroyed a large quantity of the oil we were fighting to save. And then we must recognize that peaceability as a way of dealing with large conflicts is not a dream, but a proven possibility. We have the examples of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. We have the histories of the Quakers, the Amish, and other nonviolent sects and groups. We have the examples of some nations that have successfully pursued policies of peaceableness over long stretches of time. Third, we must give the same status and prestige to the virtues and the means of peaceableness as we have heretofore given to the means of war. We should, for a start, establish a peace academy that would have the same prestige and standing as the military academies have. Fourth, we must recognize that the standards of the industrial economy lead inevitably to war against humans, just as they lead inevitably to war against nature. We must learn to prefer quality over quantity, service over profit, neighborliness over competition, people and other creatures over machines, health over wealth, a democratic prosperity over centralized wealth and power, economic health over economic growth. Fifth, we must see that a nation cannot hope to live at peace without a domestic economy that is sound, diversified, decentralized, democratic, locally adapted, ecologically responsible, and reasonably self-sufficient. Sixth, if we are to have such an economy, we must repair our country and our society. We must stop the ruin of our forests and fields, waterways and seacoasts. We must end waste and pollution. We must renew our urban and rural communities. We must remake family life and neighborhood. We must reduce indebtedness, poverty, homelessness, violence. We must renew the possibility of a democratic distribution of usable property. We must take proper care of our children. We must quit treating them as commodities for the job market and teach them to be good neighbors and citizens and to do good work. Finally, if we want to be at peace, we will have to waste less, spend less, use less, want less, need less. The most alarming sign of the state of our society now is that our leaders have the courage to sacrifice the lives of young people in war, but have not the courage to tell us that we must be less greedy and less wasteful. So I think that's pretty good. My father told me recently, he thinks I like him too much. He told me that too. But he said that I should stop quoting him and just use, he's written everything he's written so that for me to use it. So I said, well, then I'm going to claim the unsettling of America. And we'll just, from now on. So anyway, I think that going to work at what needs to be done, at the work that's right in front of you to do, brings hope, and it brings hope for peace.
So before, Mary, thank you so much. Before we go into whatever this next period is going to be like in this meeting, meaning Q&A, questions, sitting around staring at each other, I'm not sure, given the kind of the breadth of the issues that bring us together tonight. If you will just humor me, it occurred to me while you were reading that, Mary, that I have a paragraph, 2 paragraphs near the beginning of the piece I wrote for called "A Call to Farms," and the reason I want to share it is because it's my expression of why what we are trying to do in Slow Money is a small but important response to the things we just talked, that the big issues that were just put on the table. Like, how could it possibly matter with bombing going on and all the other, that's the overt violence of the day, and all of the inherent violence of the modern economy in a host of other ways, both conflicts that have been bubbling up forever, or the info wars or class warfare, or violence against damage to the environment, all these different things. How could what we're doing in Slow Money possibly make a difference, helping, in our case, let's say 800, 900, whatever the number is now, small farms around the country, and a few tens of millions of dollars. So I just wanted to read these 2 paragraphs as a kind of to do maybe a tiny bit of jujitsu, and just bounce off and just look at what are the possibilities for what we're doing. So just bear with me. It's at the level of impulse, not at the level of action I'm talking about. Just hear me out here. This is a call to farms. It is and is not a response. It is not a response to the root of any one brigade, the military mind that mapped it, or the propaganda that is translating it into ideological talking points. It is a response to the forces that turned low these few brief millennia, and lower these few brief centuries, and lower yet. You'd think lowest surely, but there seems no end to the great acceleration. These few brief decades, these few brief tweets, these few brief algorithmic breaths, these few brief ultra-fast bursts of ones and zeros. The fertile crescent into the oil patch, and amber waves of grain into food as fuel, food as weapon, food as store of cheap calories and industrial power. This is a call to farms because there is healing to be done. There is trust to be restored, mutuality to be rekindled, biodiversity to be valued, conviviality to be nurtured, carbon to be sequestered, bread to be broken, affection to be shared, humility to be cultivated. All right, that was a lot of stuff to share. But just, there's still some people joining us late. Comments, questions, concerns? Silence is okay.
This is Chris Hallstrom. I'm County Commissioner of San Miguel County, Colorado. I just really appreciated your the thoughts on doing with less. I was being picked up by my housemate, and he was listening to a podcast on nuclear power and how all the talk is about how much we have to do to meet our power needs. And and this podcast was about how we have to do it with nuclear. And he was just going off on how nobody ever talks about cutting our need for power. So in so many areas, not just power, but all the areas mentioned. It just that, but I was really taken that you mentioned that one, because that was our conversation this morning, and how it's almost taboo to talk about cutting back or using less, or and those kinds of things. So appreciate that, and I'll appreciate everybody on board here.
Well, Chris, there's nothing less than 0%, is there? So,
Great.
so a bunch of us have this crazy idea of making 0% loans to small farmers. Not everyone in the world thinks that's such a cool thing. They get confused by it. It's, it's neither investing nor philanthropy. There's a lot of different things you can say about that. But one of the things you can affirm is that that's a real statement of, it's not about how much we can make anymore. It's about how someone's saying, hi, Chris, Joe Pakal or Pakal. How do you say your name, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
Pakal.
Yep.
Okay. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. 0%. That's less.
Yeah, we got to retake the term zero, because it's always been, I mean, it has this negative connotation. And now with, we have zero food print working in Colorado. We have net zero homes. It's like zero can be great.
I do have, at the risk of sounding like I'm trying to plug a book, which is ridiculous to do when Mary Berry is on here. But in my first book, there's an essay in there called The Pursuit of Zero, as it happens. Mm-hmm. So yeah, zero can be a good thing. Someone asked me if I would type in the chat room the Gary Snyder quote, and I will in a second, or at some point. It's hard for me to multitask this way, but I'm just going to say it again. You can probably write it down yourself. Food is the field in which we daily explore our harming of the world. I don't remember exactly where that's from. It's probably from his book, Practice of the Wild, collection of his essays. But you'll find it if you poke around a little bit.
So
thank you, Chris. Yes, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm David Hill, and I live in Crestone, Colorado, which is at the base of the beautiful Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I've been aware of Woody since a friend of mine in Salida introduced me in your work and your slow money. I'm very grateful for what you're doing, Woody. It was, very timely for me. And in that respect, I graduated from school in '80, and I went into agribusiness, and I was a grain trader at the Kansas City Board of Trade.
Wow.
And at that time, my brother-in-law and sister said, hey, I think you ought to come down, because I grew up in central Kansas in McPherson, just south of Salina. And they said, why don't you go to the Land Festival? This is the Land Institute, a great place to go and really get inspired about a different perspective of agriculture. So I went, and that's where I first heard Wendell speak in probably '84 or so. And Wes Jackson, who was also a co-founder of the Land Institute. And those two guys have been just really significant in my life. And I read Unsettling of America. I read several of Wendell's books, but what they did was really open my mind, and more importantly, my heart to, a different form of agriculture. And I enjoyed what I was doing, but I knew something deep down it wasn't right. So that seed that was planted at that point tried to germinate over most of my life, where I looked at different ways to get out of conventional agriculture. But what it did is, I always kind of had to go back and be a part of that industry to make a living. So at this point, where we're at in terms of how this has influenced me, and that's the perspective I can speak from, because as I listen to the introduction, there's a lot of the symptoms of our society, and particularly our agriculture too, that are we were calling out. And for me right now, it's overwhelming, and it's been one major issue with the pandemic and now the war after another. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I started realizing where my energy wanted to be is what's emerging and not what's in decay. Those systems, I can't change them. I can perhaps help to guide a way. Having had 25 years of experience in conventional agriculture, I understand it, and I understand a lot of the issues with agribusiness. So, but the way to really solve this, for me, speaking from my perspective, is from the roots up and the inside out. And it's been noted here that small, local food production and those sorts of farms that support can't make a significant impact on the overall industry. But I feel like it can. And I feel like we start real slowly from the inside out, roots up. We have local food systems in every community. Why not? USDA funds all sorts of things. And quite frankly, it's not USDA that will solve this because they're so bureaucratically out of touch that there's no way for that to happen. So the community I live in has a local food system, very vibrant. We know our farmers. It's exciting. There's opportunities in there for young people to get involved. There's opportunities for elders to get involved. There's opportunities for people with disabilities who have been wounded in war to get their hands back in the soil. And it's an opportunity for healing. And I've experienced it firsthand, and it's hard work, but it's also a way to really channel that energy that's coming in from the outside that's overwhelmingly negative and do something, which is what I've always been a part of. Don't just talk about it, get involved. And it is important to have action. And so there's other things going on here. And one of the most interesting essays I ever saw on agribusiness and our military industrial complex was from a good friend named Ron Cruz, who was an executive director of the Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota. And he wrote an essay that talked about the whole war machine and how that came from Nazi Germany. And hydrous ammonia makes plants grow, and it also builds bombs. And so we have a readiness, that was the strategy, to have a readiness through agriculture to make war, which is just absurd. War is, we can see it now very clearly. So how we change this again is agribusiness is at a major inflection point too. I think a lot of farmers, don't really see how their kids could get involved and how there could be an ongoing legacy. And it's not fair to young farmers who really have a passion for the land and doing it in a natural way to have that kind of barrier of entry with all the capital needed. So what you're doing, Woody, and funding small farms it's just so beautiful, and it's a model that is super cool. So I'll say that, and I'll try and be conscious of everyone else's input here. So.
Geez, David, I couldn't, while you were, I hate to see how eloquent you are if you actually wrote something down or thought about it in advance. I mean, that was quite a statement you just made. So thank you for being here and giving where you're coming from professionally. It really means a lot to hear what you said. Yeah, I mean, my tiny addendum, which I know I don't even have to give, is that doing the small thing, actually taking a little of your money, I'm being very concrete here now, taking a little of your money and with your neighbors and other people living there, making a 0% loan or any kind of loan, making a loan to a small farmer near where you live is a profoundly moving thing to do. And I know it sounds a little, maybe highfalutin when I put it that way or overblown, but happily now I'm not speaking in the realm of theory. I'm speaking from the experience, mostly in Boulder, but in that video that you saw at the beginning, it showed me one of the scenes was in Carbondale. I was in a living room in Carbondale with a few dozen people. I've been doing this around the country in different places, but mostly in Boulder when I lived in Boulder for 10 years. And in Boulder, we've raised about $500,000. We've lent out about 320 or 30 of it so far, in about 20 or 30 loans. I'm just reminding us. I just think it's worth just reminding us, also, in case somebody's looking at this recording later, just to hear what the action is that holds us together, that embodies what you just said, David. We're getting together several times a year, and we're meeting with the farmers. And usually in those meetings, there might be 30 people, could be as many as 40 people of the 100 or 115 members show up at the meeting, and then they vote and make a loan. And there's very high level of consensus. There's a beautiful spirit in the room that is not bullshit. It is an honest report of what it feels like to do it. And so anybody who's listening to this who isn't already engaged in that activity, I just urge you to consider it. David did just make the throwaway comment, it takes a lot of work, and that is true. In other words, if I tie together what Mary said at the beginning a little bit to what David said, in our culture of convenience, or whatever it is we think we have, the idea of making the time to come to a meeting with 30 or 40 other people and sit for a couple of hours and review something and think about it and then make a decision about money, that can seem like a lot of work emotionally. Let's say it's a lot of emotional or intellectual work, but in a way it really isn't. Splitting wood is a lot of work too, but is it really? There's certain kinds of work that feel good, and to me this is one of them. So thank you so much, David. Sorry I carried on so long in reply.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, who is that? Is that Patricia?
Patricia, yeah, it's sort of a cross between David and Mary, because David, thank you for that, because I owned a ton of land in Crestone for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time there. And Mary, I loved your father's work. But I'm just curious about something. So Mary, you said that farmers are having a hard time surviving. And David, you said farmers are, your farmers, and they're small, but they're doing okay, right, in Crestone. And I feel that way. I'm in Denver now, but I spent a lot of time at farmers markets in Crestone and Aspen, and I'm not Crestone, I'm sorry, Aspen and Carbondale and Denver. And I don't know, the farmers seem to be doing okay. So I'm kind of curious what it means. I know they can't compete with the big Monsanto commercial farmers.
I'm not sure. This could be a rather long answer, so I'll try to keep it short and get back to peace. But if there are 0.75% of our population farming right now, 0.75%. Since the Eisenhower administration, the word from the USDA was get big or get out. That there were too many farmers. That has been policy. That's had the strength of policy. No one ever said how few were too few. So I've been asking for a while now that we call this is we have too few farmers. One of the things that I've needed to do, I've felt since I started the Berry Center, was to speak about what's going on in most of rural America. We've got some farmers. I mean, we've got some farmers who are hanging on. We've got a lot of, we work with farmers here in our Home Place Meat. In that program, we work with small farmers. My father says about my grandfather that he put a sustaining economy under good farming. And that is a long subject, which I'd be happy to take up at another time. We at the Berry Center have taken that up. Of course, farmers need to have access to land. And depending on where they are, they need more or less help with that. But they also need to be able to make a living on the farm. They need to be able to afford to farm the way that many of us think. Well, my husband is a full-time farmer, so I'll say that we should, keeping the ground covered and so on. So while I am, well, I won't go into politics too much, but I'll just say that things are not good for farmers. The terrible calamity that is industrial agriculture, maybe the worst part of it is the encouraged overproduction. So at the Berry Center, our attempt has been, and we have done with our farmers, is to bring back production control in order to hold on to a parity price. Parity meaning farmers get back cost of production and are able to make a profit. The idea of parity is completely lost in America, in American agriculture, because we've encouraged overproduction. We've encouraged, we want it cheap, efficient, and lots of it so that we can keep America fed cheaply. This all ties directly back to our subject today. I mean, we are at war with the world. We're willing to destroy what's precious in order to keep the economy humming along as it is now. It's a Faustian deal. Everything's going to be fine for a while. We're not going to count any real cost, and we're going to sacrifice people and land and keep doing it until we can't do it anymore. We don't have to. And many of us are working, many of you are working on a better way. But I want to say one more thing about that. We have also, in American agriculture, we've given farmers two choices. They can be small and entrepreneurial, going to farmers markets, CSAs, and so on. And that's important, serious. My husband had the first CSA in Kentucky. I benefited from entrepreneurial farming. I am in no way saying that there's anything wrong with that. But we have the small and industrial, we have the small and entrepreneurial, we have the large and industrial with almost nothing in the middle. So if we're going to really change the culture of agriculture, we've got to say, we need infrastructure. We need systems. I mean, people talk about food systems all the time, and I know about some small ones, and I know about the giant one that works exactly as it was planned to work. But I just would like us all to think more in terms of farmers ought to be able to farm. And we need to put in place ways to take care of moving good products and pricing them appropriately, but not outrageously. These things can be done. We're doing it. Other people have done it. So we just need to support the farmers markets, support the CSAs, all of that, but think about, don't let the conversation end there.
So if I could, I'd just like to respond to that. And I think, Mary, that's beautiful and it's so true. And having lived in rural America a lot of my life, I watched the transformation from neighbors wanting neighbors to neighbors buying neighbors.
Right.
And their whole approach was to scale. And that was the only way that, that was the only way to really support that kind of a commodity-based system. And those farmers now are extremely wealthy. If they've made it to this point, then through government subsidies, through land values that keep going up, they're extremely wealthy. And so you make an excellent point that hasn't been room for small farmers. And so what I'll say about that is that I want to just say too, what's driving this really is scarcity, and it's going to get more important, more vital all the time. But the systems that really we need to work towards are local initially, but then bioregionally, whatever you want to call it. There's a region within a certain amount of distance that should have food systems. To your point, they need systems, they need structure that support that region. And it reduces the carbon imprint. It creates more connectivity. The one thing that I experienced in my world coming kind of from an urban area to the farm is that I wasn't accepted at all. And without kids, unless I was born there, it was like, you know, I would probably never have been accepted. So there's a certain separation here between a big separation between farmers and people who eat. And when I heard people say, well, we don't need farmers, we have grocery stores, it just blew my mind. So that's my hope. That's my work now, is reestablishing the interconnectedness of where we get our food. And distributed systems are sensible in energy, they're sensible in agriculture. All the old centralized models are just absolutely broken, every one of them. And so the answer to that is that I've spent the last couple of years involved with hemp. And that's where I saw Woody last at the Regenerative Conference in Boulder. And I said something to you, Woody, and I said I was in hemp, and you wanted to introduce me to someone there, and so that was cool. But what I know is that industrial hemp can be a transformative crop, and it can change agriculture. It's very disruptive, and small farmers, if we get our act together, could be a part of that. And the whole conventional system is so antiquated right now. Flour mills, feed mills. Ethanol using corn, which is absolutely absurd. All these things are really ripe for change. So how do we fund the infrastructure that you mentioned and create systems for farmers of all sizes? And I do feel like hemp is a part of that. I know the CSAs, I agree there's a certain amount of only so far, they can only go so far. But again, that just helps to reconnect farmers with people who eat in a space of gratitude. And it's absolutely important that we give thanks for all the things that people work hard to do for us. So I'll be quiet again, but I just wanted to kind of share a little more there.
Woody, may I?
Absolutely. I don't know who that is. Just announce yourself. Jim? Yeah, I see you there.
Yeah, my name is Jim Steffen. I live in the Kansas City area, close to the grain exchange where Mr. Hill, that Mr. Hill mentioned. But we own a couple of small farms that came through my parents from my grandfather. I got a general question. With zero interest and Beetcoins as a base, small farmers, market gardeners, small cow-calf people as a beginning point and the face of local sustainable agriculture, what role does finance and commodities play in moving towards the systems that you folks speak of?
I got the feeling you were kind of addressing that at me or to me.
Anybody.
Well, somebody else, please chime in. Until you do, I'll just say a couple of quick things. So the thing when you deal with infrastructure at the, let's say, regional infrastructure, it's kind of what we're talking about. Obviously, the dollars needed for that are larger than, let's say, a $25,000 loan to an individual farm. And a lot of the loans that are now happening through the slow money network in general, and in particular through these 0% loan groups are pretty small. Now, they don't always have to be that small, and our network is still relatively small, and the flow of dollars through it is still relatively small. So over time, sure, I'd love to see. I mean, this is one of the impetuses for starting Beetcoin is the following: that when you get to the places where the larger dollars sit, in other words, the people who have the larger amounts of money. I'm going to say something that someone's going to call me afterwards and say, maybe not exactly tonight, but someone who watches the video at some point, I'm going to get in trouble for this. But in general, the family offices, the high net worth people, the impact investors, they want a market rate return on their money. In general, I'm not making a generalization. So when you get to a project that needs millions of dollars, let's not even say how many, and you need to go to sources of capital, people who can write checks at that scale, you get into a whole lot of things about risk and return, and is it really worth it, and blah, blah, blah. Whereas at the lower level where many of us are operating, we are willing to let go of that thinking. And we're going, no, we want to do this. We need to do this. We know why it's valuable to our community. And it's not about how much we make anymore. And I really think, like, you know, Mary, when you were reading, well, I don't mean to single you out, but I'm just saying when a lot of what you read about structural problems of the economy and just kind of the way we're thinking, it ties to the way investors think about what they're going to get for investing. Investing is generally an extractive activity. It's not a nurturing activity. The investments are structured to protect the investor. They're structured to get the money out as quickly as possible. In general, these things are slight oversimplifications, but they are generally true. So I'm just saying, when you get into that intermediate area between direct loans to small farms at the local level, and then you get to that next level of larger scale stuff, it raises a bit of a conundrum for us. How do we get that kind of money flowing? And that's where I'm hoping Beetcoin will help us. If we can generate a substantial flow of small donations from lots of us around the world, we can begin deploying this money in more creative ways in various places through the food system. But we have to demonstrate that we can get the flow of capital going. And there's a lot more to say about that. I mean, there are some foundations looking at regional food systems and infrastructure and whatnot. But I'd say, in my experience, the amounts of money that we need to rebuild, to restore and preserve, let's just say restore and grow local and regional food systems, we're talking about lots of capital in general. When you look at the whole, we need lots of capital, but we need it deployed in lots of regional areas. The only hope that I see is lots of people who live in those places being mobilized to provide the capital. That's why I keep doing what we are doing, as opposed to looking for institutional sources of that capital. So Jim, that was a lot of questions that you and I can keep talking about over time, but that's what comes to mind from your question.
I have something to say.
Great. So say where you're from.
Sure. My name is Catherine Dubansky, and I live in Western Maryland. We're kind of up in the mountains here, what we call mountains on the East Coast. But I was just been thinking here about CSA farms. I know I've been mentioned a few times. My husband and I have been working our small farm for 23 years now. And, you know, we started out with CSA because really that was one of the only ways we could get access to capital, was to put ourselves on the line, selling shares to people who trusted us. And then it was like, you know, we have to pay back this loan that they give us when they buy the CSA share with our sweat equity, and hoping that we had the conditions that were good enough to be able to give them their shares every week. You know, and that's just a kind of a cycle that you get into when you don't really have too many other options for affordable capital. And, you know, I'm not so sure that that's a great system and that it's necessarily one that small farmers want to buy into, but it's really one of the few options that we have. And just thinking about, Patricia, what you had to say, how your farmers at the farmers market that you were going to look like they're doing well. Well, yeah, I mean, those markets in Colorado that you're going to are probably like the rock star farmers markets. And, you know, those folks are probably dealing with customer base that has a lot of money, and they're willing to pay top dollar for high quality produce and meats. I mean, I've been out to Colorado, I've been to Crestone, those places, and, you know, I know it's all economy of scale, and the prices are different out there as far, you know, because water is more expensive, all those issues. But I mean, the majority of farmers I know are not doing well. Even those of us that are, you know, working on small farms doing like intensive style, you know, diversified farming operations. I mean, boy, ever getting out of debt is, you know, something that is, it's like the gold standard to think about. So anyway, that's just a different perspective.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's a good little dose of reality from the farm perspective.
I think I just would respond to that with I've been a CSA farmer, and I've gone to a lot of farmers markets, raised pastured poultry. Also, I'm from tobacco country, so raised tobacco under the Burley Tobacco Program. And I bring that up at the end, so which I shouldn't probably do, but the tobacco program is what has inspired my work at the Berry Center, which continues my family's work. My grandfather wrote the legislation that was the Burley Tobacco Program, which was a Depression era program. It ended that lasted until 2004. And so for once and for a while, we had in the 8-state Burley Belt a pretty good diversified, healthy agriculture. I use the word healthy, and I can imagine what people are thinking. But for a while, we had an economy of cooperation, not competition, which I think is what is maybe what we're talking about, what our hope is. And so I speak about the entrepreneurial farming that I've done and many of you've done, and we've needed to do it. Many of us have enjoyed doing it. I will say that I for years went to farmers markets, and I often seemed happier than I was. But anyway, but these entrepreneurial enterprises are putting people in direct competition with each other, which is all right. But we've got 2 pretty successful CSAs in our county. They are in direct competition with each other. If 3 or 4 more farmers in our county took up CSA farming, they'd be fighting even harder for market share because we were first adopters. So the world was kind of wide open for us. But now these young people, these wonderful young people, are in competition with all the organic food at Kroger that people think is local, Whole Foods. The competition is just so fierce. And so along with supporting these entrepreneurial enterprises, we need to think about infrastructure. And I want to say one more thing about the crazy times I think we're living in. When the tobacco program went away, and call me at the Berry Center if you want to know more about that, or look us up. When we lost it, because Mitch McConnell likes the free market better than he likes small farmers. It was said, though, that we lost it because of health. And of course, tobacco is not healthy. I'm speaking for the program and the principles of the program, not tobacco. But what has replaced tobacco is the toxic erosive farming of corn and soybeans on our rolling marginal farmland. So we made no trade for health. We traded in all those farmers, and Kentucky now is losing farmers faster than any state in the country. We didn't trade all that in for health. We traded it for industrial agriculture, which is ruining us. So I guess that I just think you just have to keep thinking. What's happened? Why has it happened? I mean, our archive at the Berry Center that has my father's and grandfather's papers is for that reason. How do we judge what's happened? If we lose the history, then we can't make any decent judgment, and we can't see our way forward more intelligently. That's it.
Mary Spadaro has her hand raised. I don't see you, Mary, but I see. Are you still there?
I am here.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have my camera on. Well, it's so a very different perspective from out here in Hawaii. I founded and facilitate Slow Money Hawaii. And much of our agricultural land out here used to be in sugar or pineapple production. It was plantations and the labor was immigrant labor. And then with changes in the global economy, those businesses eventually ended here. And our small farmers are very small, with an average of maybe 2 to 10 acres for a small farm. And what I'm experiencing here is that over the past 4 or 5 years, I've had about 56 people make slow money loans, and we have facilitated about $450,000 in loans. And in the last 2 or 3 years, 2 years, I'd say, it's actually become competitive for distributing the funds that the USDA and others have all come up with microloan programs. But they still have a very bureaucratic, burdensome process so that they take a long time. And foundations, and not so much donor advised funds, but foundations have also now got the local food system on their radar and actually made it a pretty high priority. So there's a lot of private grant money entering the, I'm going to call it the marketplace. And it's becoming more difficult to make slow money loans because although there is this tremendous need to change our food system, and Hawaii, by the way, is about 90% dependent upon imports. And for us, an import is 2,500 miles to the nearest landmass. And if we were to experience an earthquake or a tidal wave, all of our sea and airports are coastal, and we could become really isolated. And that's only been recently put on the minds of the public. So what I have found in the slow money loans is that the bottleneck here is the time that it takes for farmers to become loan worthy, that we have some farmer training programs that people go through, and some people just start on their own. But it just takes time for people to move back into this space and to be ready to take a loan. And I'm wondering if others are having the same experience. It sounds like rural America is very different. Thank you.
Anybody want to respond to Mary? I have a general comment to make. Mary, some of the strategic things that you're raising, issues you're dealing with, and sort of deal flow and investment readiness and competitive sources of capital and government programs and foundations and whatnot, to me, it all points in the same direction. And that's why I'm putting my personal energy now into the 0% loan idea, using donated capital to make 0% loans. Why? Because I think if we think long term, we will see the need to get beyond the individual transaction, just a few well-intentioned people making a loan to somebody. Well, what happens after that? They go on vacation, the loan does pay back, but doesn't build anything for the future. It helps that one transaction. I think to the extent Mary made a comment about, what did you say, Mary, about the cooperative economy, from the competitive economy to the cooperative economy. And I really think I hope that slow money is playing a small role in moving us in the direction of not thinking as individual investors about our risk and return to us, and realizing that given the state of the world, and I'm going to kind of call the question here in a second because it's 8:12 p.m. I'm just watching the thing. We're trying to keep these things close to an hour, if that's okay.
Woody,
Hang on. Yes, go ahead. Go. Who's that, Mary?
It's Mary. Before you end, I
Yeah.
would like to add another comment, but you finish
Oh,
first.
good. Yeah. I didn't mean, I was just not, I just noticed the clock while I was speaking. So yeah, I'll just finish my thought and then you can say whatever's on your mind. I think the time has come to for a step function, if you will, for us to jump out of the way we've been thinking about investing in philanthropy in the 20th century, which is basically an industrial model. You make as much money as you can, and then if you get enough of it, you can do some quote unquote different things with it and sprinkle some of it back. But the damage that is done in the making of the money cannot be repaired in that fashion. There's too much damage. And now we don't have time to go through another generation and try to create the next couple of thousand billionaires and hope some of them give enough money away to solve the problems. I think the only hope is to create a structure. Mary talked about structures in the sense of regional food systems. We need to think the same way about the financial system. We need to create structures that will aggregate capital from residents in a region, and the capital is permanent and stays in the region and circulates in perpetuity and grows slowly over time, and is put to work by the people in the region. That sounds pretty idealistic the way I just said that, but it isn't, because we're doing it in this tiny way already in the 5 soil groups that are making the 0% loans. I'd like to see there be 100 of these groups around the country, or 1,000 of them. And I'd like to see them very, very slowly grow over a generation or two into fairly substantial pools of capital that are locally and regionally deployed. But I guess what I'm trying to say, Mary, is, and this is not a debate with you individually. I mean, we're all in the system and we're trying to figure out pathways forward. I think, I don't know, this is kind of where my book came from. It's like we've all been around for, many of us on this call, I'm looking at the pictures I can see, have been around for a while. The first Earth Day was in 1970. Mary and I have talked now and again about how when her dad wrote The Unsettling of America, there was a moment where it was like, okay, he did it. That's it. Things have to change now. The wisdom is out there. We can't go back, but here we are. And here we are, everyone saying, how could the war be happening in the Ukraine the way it is? How could there be like a siege of cities where they're just wiping out people the way it's happening? And how could this all still be happening in 2022? And it is. Like we're not attacking the problem, if I can use the word attack, if you'll forgive that. We're not attacking the problem at its roots. So if I were trying to tie this together, which is a little challenging for me, I would go back to Mary's comments about the cooperative economy. And I would tie it to Mary's thing saying, look how hard it is for us to find deals and to do these transactions and whatever. That's a challenge. And then I forget the name of the woman from Western Maryland, Catherine, I think it was. She's not on. I think she might have left us, saying it's hard from the farmer's perspective to make the CSA work. Blah, blah. We don't have anything in the middle. If I use Mary's metaphor of in the middle, to me, in the middle means something that's between philanthropy and investing, that's for the future, that has a sense of urgency to it, that is not driven by individual gain, but is squarely and 100% driven by long-term community benefit and the mission to support and help grow the community of small farms. And that's going to require a change of our consciousness about money and transactions and relationships. So sorry, that sounded a little like a sermon. Mary, your final comment, and then I think we'll wrap up.
Yeah, no, nothing to apologize for there. The other thing, though, is that while it's challenging to make the loans to farmers right now, there's a real lack of infrastructure. It keeps the farmers who are already operating from expanding or from doing more revenue generating activities. It's probably tougher here in Hawaii again, because if it's not within our state, within a few hundred miles, then it's not for thousands of miles and really high shipping costs. But we don't have the bottling facilities here. We don't have enough slaughter facilities here. Farmers are wanting a high pressure production canning system here. And these are multi-million-dollar enterprises. So I guess I would just add to the table then that there needs to be money flowing in this direction too, not just to farmers. And I don't know, you know, it would seem to be the right place for government, but we can't wait for government.
All right, thank you for that, Mary. Well, given the hour, we never made it to the Quaker meeting, and that's quite all right because everyone had a lot to say and share, so that's great. I'm just going to end with a couple of words from my Call to Farms essay, which we will be circulating shortly. And thank you all so much for participating tonight. The question before us then is not only how we will mobilize to redress the immediate harm done by militarism. The question is also how we will plant the seeds of a peaceable economy. There is no better place to start than with how we grow food, how we feed ourselves and one another, how we relate to and care for the land. As awe-inspiring as globalization is, and as terrifying as the shadows of ancient tribal antipathies and geopolitical ambitions are, they must not absorb the whole of our attention. While we deal with them, we must also prepare the ground for what comes next. Let us nurture a great awakening of local conscientiousness, a great coming together in communities and watersheds and food sheds around the world, so that what Slow Food's Carlo Petrini calls virtuous globalization can sink deep perennial roots into a complementary process of virtuous localization. Let us imagine, and then march forthrightly in the direction of, with a kind of affection and gumption for the ages, the vision of millions of individuals in thousands of communities around the world, bringing money back down to earth in the name of health and peace. I guess that was a kind of that's my best benediction I have to offer for the evening. So thanks again for everybody for coming. Mary, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Give our best to your dad. And
I will.
There's no way to thank him enough for all the inspiration and wisdom over the years. And we'll be in touch again soon, everybody. See many of you in 2 weeks, and be on the lookout for the Call to Farms essay when we circulate it. Thanks so much, everybody. Peace.